The event coordinator grabbed the old man by the elbow and steered him away from the front row of chairs. "Sir, I'm going to need you to move to the back. These seats are reserved for invited guests and major donors." The veteran looked down at the folded piece of paper in his weathered hands. The invitation that had arrived at his shelter 3 weeks ago. The invitation that specifically requested his presence at the dedication of the new Medal of Honor memorial. "But I was invited," he said quietly. "I have the letter right here." The coordinator did not even glance at the paper. "I'm sure you were, sir, but we need to present a certain image today. The president is coming. There will be cameras. I'm sure you understand." She guided him past the gleaming rows of white chairs, past the distinguished guests in their pressed suits and military dress uniforms, past the velvet ropes and the towering monument draped in ceremonial cloth. She deposited him behind a maintenance shed at the far edge of the memorial grounds, out of sight of the cameras and the crowd. "You can watch from here," she said, with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You'll still be able to hear everything." Then she walked away without looking back. If this story reminds you that true honor cannot be hidden, comment respect below. Raymond Delacroix had stopped expecting dignity from the world a long time ago. 43 years of living on the margins of society had taught him that most people looked right through men like him. They saw the threadbare coat and the uneven beard and the shoes held together with duct tape, and they made their judgments in the space of a single heartbeat. It no longer bothered him the way it once had. He had made his peace with invisibility. What bothered him was the letter. Someone at the Department of Defense had taken the time to find him, had tracked him down through the labyrinth of shelters and soup kitchens and halfway houses that had been his home for more than 4 decades, had sent a formal invitation on embossed government stationery requesting his presence at the dedication of the National Medal of Honor Memorial in Washington, D.C. The letter had called him a hero. The letter had said his attendance would honor all those who had served. The letter had promised that he would be recognized. And now he stood behind a maintenance shed, watching the ceremony unfold through a gap between stacked folding chairs, while donors in $1,000 suits occupied the seats that should have been his. The National Medal of Honor Memorial had been 15 years in the making, a towering structure of white granite and black marble, inscribed with the names of every recipient of the nation's highest military honor dating back to the Civil War. The dedication ceremony had drawn dignitaries from across the country. Senators and representatives filled the front rows. Military leaders from every branch of service sat in crisp formation. Families of fallen heroes clutched folded flags and photographs of loved ones who would never grow old. And at the center of it all, a raised platform where the President of the United States would speak, flanked by an honor guard and the memorial's towering central spire. Raymond could see the event coordinator moving through the crowd, checking clipboards and whispering into a headset. She was young, probably late 20s, with the polished efficiency of someone who had built her career on making important people comfortable. She had looked at Raymond and seen a liability, a blemish on her carefully curated event. She had not asked his name. She had not asked why he had been invited. She had simply removed him, the way one might remove a stain from a tablecloth before guests arrived. The ceremony began with the national anthem, performed by a military choir whose voices rose into the autumn sky like a prayer. Raymond stood at attention behind his maintenance shed, his hand over his heart, his eyes fixed on the flag that rippled above the memorial. He remembered another flag, torn and bloodied, planted in foreign soil by hands that no longer existed. He remembered the faces of men who had died believing that flag meant something. He wondered if they would recognize what it had become. The speeches began. A senator spoke about sacrifice. A general spoke about courage. The Secretary of Defense spoke about the eternal debt owed to those who had earned the Medal of Honor. Each speaker gestured toward the gleaming memorial, toward the names carved in stone, toward the legacy that would endure for generations. None of them looked toward the maintenance shed, where one of those names stood alone in the shadows. The President arrived with the fanfare that always accompanied the Commander-in-Chief. Marine One descended onto a nearby landing zone, and a motorcade of black vehicles swept through the memorial grounds with practiced precision. Secret Service agents in dark suits fanned out across the perimeter, their eyes scanning the crowd with mechanical efficiency. The event coordinator rushed to greet the presidential party, her smile now genuine and eager. Raymond watched from his hidden vantage point as the president emerged from the armored limousine. He was younger than Raymond had expected, with the energetic bearing of a man who had not yet been worn down by the weight of his office. He shook hands with the assembled dignitaries, posed for photographs with military families, and made his way toward the raised platform with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. But something unexpected happened as the president mounted the steps to the podium. He paused. He turned to one of his aides and asked a question that the microphones did not catch. The aide consulted a tablet, then shook his head with obvious confusion. The president asked again, more insistently this time. The aide spoke into a radio. The event coordinator was summoned. Raymond watched her face drain of color as the president spoke to her directly. The commotion that followed was unlike anything the carefully orchestrated ceremony had anticipated. Secret Service agents began moving through the crowd, speaking to attendees and checking identification. Military officers conferred in urgent clusters. The event coordinator stood frozen beside the podium, her clipboard hanging limply at her side, her expression one of dawning horror. Then the president himself descended from the platform and began walking through the seated guests, scanning faces with obvious purpose. He stopped to speak with a uniformed general, who pointed toward the back of the memorial grounds, toward the maintenance shed. Raymond felt his heart seize in his chest as the President of the United States began walking directly toward him. The Secret Service agents flanked their commander, hands hovering near concealed weapons, eyes fixed on the disheveled old man who stood alone behind a pile of folding chairs. But the president waved them back. He approached Raymond with measured steps, his expression shifting from determination to something that looked almost like reverence. He stopped 3 feet away. And then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, the President of the United States snapped to attention and rendered a crisp military salute. "Sergeant Major Raymond Delacroix," the President said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent memorial grounds. "I have been looking for you, sir. I was told you would be in the front row. I was told you would be seated with the other recipients. When I didn't see you, I asked my staff to find you. They told me you had been moved." His eyes flicked toward the event coordinator, who stood at the edge of the crowd with tears streaming down her face. "They told me someone decided you didn't belong with the honored guests, that someone looked at you and saw something other than what you are." The president lowered his salute and extended his hand. "On behalf of the United States of America, I apologize. What was done to you today was wrong, and I intend to make it right." The story that emerged over the following hours would dominate news cycles for weeks. Raymond Delacroix had enlisted in the United States Army in 1967, at the age of 19. He had served 3 tours in Vietnam, earning a reputation as one of the most skilled and dedicated soldiers in his unit. In April of 1972, during a mission near the Cambodian border, his 12-man reconnaissance team had been ambushed by a numerically superior enemy force. Pinned down and taking casualties, the team had faced certain annihilation. Sergeant Delacroix had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He had ordered his men to retreat while he provided covering fire. Alone against more than 40 enemy combatants, he had held his position for over 2 hours, allowing his team to reach safety and call for extraction. He had killed 23 enemy soldiers. He had been wounded 7 times. When the rescue helicopters finally arrived, they found him still firing, his ammunition nearly exhausted, surrounded by the bodies of those who had tried to overrun his position. For his actions that day, Raymond Delacroix had been awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to his comrades. The president at the time had placed the medal around his neck in a ceremony at the White House. He had been 24 years old. But the war had taken things from Raymond that no medal could restore. The physical wounds healed, leaving behind scars that would ache in cold weather for the rest of his life. The psychological wounds were deeper. The faces of the men who had died in that ambush visited him every night. The sounds of gunfire and screaming echoed in his ears during quiet moments. He returned to a country that did not want to acknowledge what he had done or what it had cost him. He tried to build a normal life. He married, had children, found work in construction. But the war would not let him go. The nightmares grew worse. The drinking started as a way to sleep and became a way to survive. His marriage collapsed. His children grew distant. By 1981, Raymond Delacroix was living on the streets of Chicago, his Medal of Honor pawned for food money, his identity as a hero erased by the grinding machinery of poverty and neglect. For 43 years he had drifted through shelters and soup kitchens, a ghost carrying memories that no one wanted to hear. The invitation to the memorial dedication had arrived like a message from another lifetime, addressed to a man he barely remembered being. The president led Raymond back to the front of the memorial, walking slowly to accommodate the old soldier's unsteady gait. The crowd parted before them in silence. Donors who had occupied the front row seats rose and stepped aside, their expressions shifting from confusion to shame as understanding spread through the assembly. The president guided Raymond to a chair at the very center of the front row, directly facing the memorial and the podium. Then he mounted the steps and approached the microphone. "I had prepared remarks for today," the president said, his voice echoing across the hushed grounds. "I was going to speak about the meaning of sacrifice, about the debt we owe to those who have earned our nation's highest honor. But something happened this morning that requires me to speak a different truth." He paused, looking out at the assembled dignitaries and cameras. "This man," he continued, gesturing toward Raymond, "is Sergeant Major Raymond Delacroix. In 1972, he single-handedly held off an enemy force of over 40 combatants to save the lives of 11 American soldiers. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions. And today, at the dedication of a memorial built to honor men exactly like him, he was hidden away behind a maintenance shed because someone decided he didn't look the part." The president's voice hardened. "We talk about honoring our veterans. We build memorials and hold ceremonies and give speeches about sacrifice. But what does that honor mean if we only extend it to veterans who look the way we expect them to look? What does it mean if we hide away the ones whose suffering has marked them in ways that make us uncomfortable?" Sergeant Major Delacroix did not stop being a hero when he lost his home. He did not stop being a Medal of Honor recipient when his clothes became worn and his beard grew long. The valor that earned him our nation's highest recognition did not expire because life dealt him wounds that we failed to help him heal. He turned to face Raymond directly. "Sergeant Major, I am told that you pawned your Medal of Honor decades ago, during a time when you needed food more than you needed recognition. Today, I would like to present you with a replacement. Not because the medal itself matters more than the man who earned it, but because you deserve to have it back. You deserve to be seen for what you are." An aide approached carrying a velvet case. The president descended from the podium and knelt before Raymond's chair. With gentle hands, he lifted the Medal of Honor from its case and placed it around the old soldier's neck. The pale blue ribbon settled against Raymond's threadbare coat, like a crown restored to a forgotten king. The ceremony that followed was unlike any the memorial had ever hosted. One by one, the military leaders in attendance rose from their seats and approached Raymond to pay their respects. Generals who commanded armies, admirals who controlled fleets, veterans of conflicts spanning 7 decades. Each one saluted the old man in the worn coat, acknowledging him as what he had always been: a brother in arms, a hero among heroes. The event coordinator stood at the back of the crowd, her face a mask of devastation. When the formal ceremony concluded, she approached Raymond with trembling steps. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable. I looked at you and I saw what I was trained to see. A problem to be managed. An image issue. I didn't see you. I didn't even try." Raymond studied her face for a long moment. The anger he might have felt was absent. In its place was something that surprised even him: understanding. "You made a mistake," he said quietly. "I've made plenty of my own. The question isn't whether you fall down. The question is whether you get back up and do better." He reached out and patted her hand with the same gentleness he might have shown a frightened child. "You've got a lot of years ahead of you. Use them well." The weeks that followed transformed Raymond's life in ways he had never imagined possible. The Department of Veterans Affairs, galvanized by the national attention, fast-tracked his enrollment in comprehensive care programs. He was provided with permanent housing, medical treatment for conditions that had gone untreated for decades, and counseling for the psychological wounds that had haunted him since the jungles of Vietnam. His children, who had lost contact with him years ago, saw the news coverage and reached out. There were tearful reunions and difficult conversations, the slow rebuilding of bridges that had seemed forever burned. The construction company Raymond had worked for in the 1970s established a scholarship in his name for children of homeless veterans. Donations poured in from across the country. The memorial itself added a new plaque near its entrance. It read, "In honor of all who served, regardless of how they return. A hero's worth is not measured by appearance but by sacrifice. Dedicated to Sergeant Major Raymond Delacroix and all the forgotten warriors who walk among us." 1 year later, Raymond stood at the memorial on the anniversary of its dedication. He was dressed in a clean suit now, his beard neatly trimmed, his posture straight despite the protests of aging joints. The Medal of Honor hung at his chest, polished and gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Beside him stood the president, returned to mark the occasion with a private visit away from cameras and crowds. They stood in silence before the towering spire, reading the names of heroes carved in stone. "I think about them every day," Raymond said softly. "The men who didn't make it home. The ones I couldn't save. For a long time I thought surviving was a punishment, like I was supposed to die with them and got left behind by mistake." The president nodded slowly. "And now?" Raymond considered the question. "Now I think maybe I was left behind for a reason. Maybe it was so I could be standing here today, so people could see what happens to the ones who fall through the cracks. So maybe, just maybe, fewer of us fall through in the future." He touched the names on the marble with trembling fingers. "They're the heroes. I'm just the one who got lucky enough to tell their story." There are moments that define a nation's character. Moments when we are forced to confront the distance between what we claim to value and how we actually behave. On a crisp autumn day in Washington, D.C., a homeless veteran was hidden behind a maintenance shed so that wealthy donors would not have to see him. He had earned the Medal of Honor. He had saved 11 American lives. He had given everything he had in service to his country, and someone decided he was not presentable enough to sit in the front row. But that is not where the story ends. It ends with a president who noticed an empty chair and asked where the hero had gone. It ends with a nation confronting its own hypocrisy and choosing to do better. It ends with an old soldier finally receiving the welcome home he had been denied for more than 4 decades. The next time you see someone whose appearance marks them as different, as less than, as someone to be avoided, remember Raymond Delacroix. Remember that you cannot see a person's medals by looking at their clothes. Remember that the person you dismiss might be the bravest soul you will ever encounter. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that every veteran deserves to be seen and that true honor recognizes worth in every form it takes.